We have, Nigeria as well.
Great.
We have a few other countries represented.
That's great, because we're getting a lot more students from Nigeria and in certain parts of the city. And so that's been really, really helpful getting to know all about Staten Island is getting in certain parts, Rockaways. I mean, it's interesting. It's very geographical.
Well, why don't
Okay.
we go ahead and get officially started. So welcome everyone to the New York Foreign Press Center, particularly Chancellor Carmen Fariña, who's here to speak to us about initiatives in the New York City Public Schools as a model for education in America. So thank you so much for coming, and let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, some of you may actually have heard more about my history, but I think I'll review it quickly. I started school in New York City as a non-English speaking student. So I'm a firm believer in speaking 2 languages, 3 or 4 if necessary. And I believe that's one of the things I also bring to New York City, because we've introduced a lot more dual language programs and foreign language programs, so that more of our students will speak 2 languages by the time they graduate high school. I was a teacher for 22 years. I was a principal for 10 years. I was a superintendent, deputy chancellor. I've done just about every job in the system. I was also a parent of 2 students who went through the public schools, so I also know from a parent perspective how important it is for parents to be involved and have information. And that's one of the other big emphasis that we have in this administration, working with parents. We have parent academies. We have actually increased the amount of time that parents can spend in school, and including what kind of information we send out to parents so that they can be informed on many different levels. And now I am Deputy Chancellor of a system of 1.1 million students, and it's a little scary. Over 1,600 schools, 200 more schools if you count the charter schools, which I also work with. And it's a very exciting time in New York City, because we're really working on what we call equity and access, which is how do we make sure that our students who live in the Bronx get the same education as the students who live in Manhattan. And it's a really big job to try to get that done, but I'm very fortunate and I have wonderful people working for me, and I'm able to meet with them on a regular basis to make sure we're all on the same page as to what we want for our students. So I'm here to answer your questions and see how I might help you.
I'll start.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm James Randall with Al Jazeera. Thanks for coming in and talking to us today. I'm kind of like working on like a story, a specific story, which so I came in so I'd have a chance to ask you a question, which maybe you can answer, or maybe you'd like to talk to me afterwards about. But my editors asked for a story about, Donald Trump and the kind of language and rhetoric that he's using, and how that's affecting people who work in areas like yourself that are sort of focused on multicultural, like community building, and whether or not the people who work in education are noticing anything like in the playgrounds of schools, in the classrooms of schools. Is the kind of divisiveness in some of the language about Hispanics and Muslims and other groups that are coming out at the top level in politics, is it in any way affecting what's really happening on the ground in America? Or is it just one crazy guy sounding off?
Well, I'm not making any political opinions, because one of the things I've been very clear about to my staff, that includes principals and teachers, that their political opinions have to stay on their free time, not on their school time. But I will say that, and we'll start with what's happening just in New York City. One of the things we've gotten very involved in this year is something we call civic engagement education. And that is how, even starting in kindergarten with 5-year-olds, we teach children how to make the right decisions and how to get involved in your community and in government. This past week, we enrolled over 8,000 students to register to vote next year in our high schools. And part of that is teaching students how to make good decisions about how you vote and who you vote for, without taking any stance on the good people and the bad people and the in-between people. So it's about, what do you look for in a leader? You look for someone who brings people together. You look for someone whose philosophical stances publicly are going to say, this is what America stands for. So we're not making judgments on individuals. We're trying to educate people, what do good leaders make? And I expect principals and teachers to be the first of the models that students have. So I think that that is very important job for educators. I think also that in terms of in schools, we have something called mock elections where students, make believe they're voting for someone. And I think this year it's a good time just to talk about what an election is and what kind of person, rather than have students vote on issues that they may just be bringing to school what their parents are saying, and that could be exactly what you said. But right now in New York City, which is different than the rest of the world, I understand, I think we've done a very good job at sticking to the philosophy of government rather than individual personalities in government.
More broad there, because I want something a bit more specific than that, obviously. Has there been any change in the racial dynamics in classrooms in New York over the last 6 months compared to the 6 months previous?
Not to the point that has come to my attention, no.
What is the biggest challenge of managing such a big network? Because we tend to see foreigners, New York City as a whole city, but it's very nuclearized. I mean, you have very specific neighborhoods inside neighborhoods, and that defines each school in each district. Even in the same district, you have different schools with the same population, but it's so complicated, no? I don't know what is the role of real estate in the definition of the demography of each school, even the parents, because they tend to go to take their kids to certain kind of schools instead of other ones because they have the perception that, it's very dynamic, but at the same time,
I think one of the first rules that I changed when I became chancellor was based on all my years of being an educator. And that is, we went back to creating superintendents, which would be like directors, but geographically. So that, for example, a superintendent is in charge of about 30 schools, all that are in the same neighborhoods, elementary and middle schools. And we didn't have that prior to my getting here. We had something called clusters, where you could be the head of a couple of schools, but the schools could be Manhattan, Bronx, all mixed in. I think it's important to have leaders who understand certain neighborhoods so you can adapt certain things to those neighborhoods, but also be able to meet with parents whose kids are in elementary and then in the same middle schools. So we did that. We have 44 superintendents, big city. But the other thing is that the expectations and the aspirations for everyone, no matter, like I said, whether you're Bronx or has to be exactly the same. So our expectations are all our students should aspire to go to college. All our students should be able to graduate, certainly high school, within 4 years. Whether you're Black, Latino, Arabic, whatever, that you will be able to have the same high-quality teachers and be in the schools that ask for the same thing. How that's done is different from area to area. So, for example, if you're a superintendent in a district where the students have been far behind for many, many years, we have to put more resources there. We have to put more professional development there for the teachers. So our goals for the whole city are the same, but how we're going to get there is different by geography according to the districts. And one of the things we're looking at right now, we have something called renewal schools. And these are the schools that have 94 of them that haven't met what we call the state standards. And all of you have that in whatever countries you represent. So we're giving those schools extra help. We're also reviewing who the directors are, the principals. We have already removed some principals if we don't think they're the right principals. And the same thing with teachers as well. So we're really working very hard to have one philosophy, but 44 different ways of getting it done. And having these superintendents, I meet with them every single month. And I see them as individuals. Now I'm having one-on-one conversations with each of them. What are their obstacles? What are they proud of? And then the other thing we've done in New York in the last 2 years, there used to be a time when one of the newspapers here would write down a rating system of all the schools, which are the top schools, which are in a certain order. We're now saying that all schools have the ability to be successful as long as they meet certain things. And one of the things is that teachers in that building have to work well together. People have to trust the principal, parents as well as teachers. We have to be able to be progressing academically. So we have something called the Framework for Great Schools, capacity building. And instead of competing with each other, we're collaborating. So if you have a great school, I just went to a school today, they're doing something very unique. She keeps it a secret, she says. She doesn't want to tell anybody what she's doing. But I said, you can't keep good things a secret. So I'm already going to go back to my office and make sure 2 other schools that I think could use this knowledge will go visit her. So we're doing a lot more of intervisitations. I would say by probably every single school in New York City has visited at least one or two other schools in the city to see how they can improve their own school. And that wasn't happening before. People didn't visit each other. Whatever you did in your school was yours, and you didn't share good stuff with anyone else. So that's a big part of the philosophy.
Because I'm in the process of putting
But-
my kids.
Okay.
And I have to say that it's pretty cruel in general.
Well, what grade?
Because the competition that you mentioned is at the level of the parents.
No kidding.
That creates a spiral, no?
Yeah, but you really are, it's an elementary school that you're looking for your child?
A kindergarten.
Okay, but kindergarten should be your zone
Pre-K,
school.
pre-K.
Oh, pre-K now, 4-year-olds, 68,000 4-year-olds for next year. You don't have to go to your zone school. You can go several places. You have a choice of 12. By the time your children get to kindergarten, then you can apply to your zone school. Or if you're in a school you like in their space, you can stay in that school after pre-K. But we can talk privately because I don't know what neighborhood you're talking in.
I was
No, I'm just to
it's a
say
question
what the
of,
rules are.
I'm not, I mean,
Right.
I know what is the past. I
Right.
have great schools because in
Right.
the zone where I live in, but it's more the fact that the parents are in part of the process of segregation, I think. No?
Well,
It's not a problem of the system or
Well,
the
it's-
neighbors.
it
it's
has to do
that
with the-
competition between parents.
no, I think that is one of the reasons why our mayor is so committed to affordable housing. You go to school, and that's not true in most countries, but here you go to school in the neighborhood you live in. So where you can afford to pay certain rents is where you're more likely to go to school. This year, we passed something called PROS, and schools that have the space, because you can't not take your zone children, but if they have the space, they were able to apply for how many seats they wanted to save for students who were different than the kids they may ordinarily have. And the way that we did this, for students who get free lunch, some of these schools set aside certain seats for those students even if they didn't live in their neighborhood. And we tried it last year. It was actually quite successful, and we hope to expand it for September. But the most important thing is that when people generally, just look at the Sunday Times, when they rent or buy an apartment, it says zone for such and such a school. And that's part of the economics of the city. We are forming more schools that are what we call non-zoned, where you don't have to live in a certain neighborhood. The school I went to today, she has one class on each grade that's not zoned. It's a citywide program. So those are the other ways to do it. But it's really mainly that you go to the school in the neighborhood you live in, so the neighborhood determines that rather than people consciously saying things. And it is something we're struggling with. We want more diverse schools. It changes when it goes to middle school, when the kids come from many different neighborhoods to go to a middle school, and certainly in high school it's totally different. But in elementary school it's on, and that's why the affordable housing, when you start having neighborhoods with mixed incomes in them, that will be part of, I hope, some of the solution to diversity.
What is your relationship with the private
Sorry,
ones?
Can we let
Okay,
the other
okay.
gentleman have a question?
Go ahead, sir.
All right. My name is Adesina Idugbe. I report for State Television. It's a state-owned media outfit in Nigeria. May I know from you the concentration of African immigrants in your schools against geographical spread? That's one. And secondly, in view of the fact that there is high level of cultural diversity in New York City, the possibility of new immigrants from African continent coming to these schools and facing cases of bullying among their peers is very much high. How are you ensuring that those new immigrants into your school system do not face these challenges with respect to being made nonsense of in terms of their cultural background and challenge of integrating fully into the New York system educational platform?
Well, let me answer the first part of the question first. Immigrants, all immigrants, tend to come to a country and want to live with other immigrants like themselves. They bring each other over, they get each other jobs. So the fact that they're clustered in certain neighborhoods is normal. So if they're clustered in a certain neighborhood, they tend to be clustered in a certain school, or in certain parts of the city. I certainly know of two for Nigeria, but I'm sure there are more. In terms of the bullying, I really haven't heard that to be an issue, other than what I do think we need to do more of, and we're doing. All schools have something called a parent coordinator. parent coordinator is a person who is supposed to greet parents and be responsive to parents in the school. They report to the principal, but their work 100% is to work with parents. And we've asked parent coordinators, particularly in the beginning of the school year, to focus on working with all new immigrant parents, talk to them what are some of the things they particularly want to do. Do they want to have a support group for themselves? Do they want to learn more about how to navigate New York City or, citizenship? And it's very different school to school, but the parent coordinator role is very much there for the parents. In terms of bullying, we have a lot of what we call anti-bullying curriculum, and we have something called Respect for All curriculum, and schools get awards if they can show that with diverse students and parents that they are training children to be respectful of other cultures. Certainly when another culture starts coming in large numbers to a school, we expect those parents to share with other parents what are some of their customs, what are some of the foods they like to eat, what are some of the holidays they observe. This year New York City became the first city in this country to celebrate the Muslim holidays. And not only are we celebrating the holidays, but we actually put together teaching guides to send out to all the principals in New York City, whether you have a Muslim population or not, talking about Al-Eid and what it looks like and why they celebrate it and what are some of the vocabulary words around it. We're also the second city in this country to celebrate the Chinese Lunar New Year. But it's not just about celebrating. We put together a teaching guide. We have teaching guides on Diwali for the Indian holidays. We will create more guides and more culturally sensitive materials for principals to use as we see certain immigrant groups grow in a certain area. One of our large or new groups coming into this country is from Albania. And one of the schools that's getting a lot of students from Albania has asked if we could find someone to work in her school who speaks Albanian. So we're a very big city, but we try whatever possible to accommodate parents. We translate almost all our materials into the 8 most common languages in New York City. And also when we do open meetings, we have translators at those open meetings. Another growing language is Urdu for us in the city, Bengali as well. So we try to figure out where's happening and how do we help those emerging communities. But if anyone talks to us about a specific community being ostracized or bullied, we get on it right away. We have people in every borough office we call them student support services, who do nothing but handle these issues. And we have a parent-family liaison, a person who any parent who feels something's happening can go to them and they deal with it.
As a follow-up to that, Mike, do we have an upsurge in the number of students coming from Nigerian environment into this city? And secondly, what will be your assessment of the performances of these African immigrants who are within the New York school system?
We don't have it down by ethnicity, nor do I think I want to really think about it. It's really more of, we have the results school by school, grade by grade, but not necessarily by ethnicity. But I mean, like I said, in the 2 communities that I know, I was just in a school yesterday in the Rockaways where the principal was actually very proud of a group of students. I think she had 4 students who just came from Nigeria, and how she was integrating them to school and what they already knew. They had come, not all our immigrants come with prior schooling. That's a big challenge for us. There are certain countries that by the time we get the students, including middle school kids, they've never been in school. So there's a difference between the students who come, which are proficient in their own language, and students who come, they can speak the language, but they can't read or write it. We're also now, for the first time, coming across students who are speaking languages that have no written capacity. They're spoken languages, they're more like dialects, but that's all they know, and translating that to another language. We're also opening more dual language programs in the city. We opened 40, including Polish, Arabic, Hebrew, French, Spanish. The list is endless. Our biggest challenge is finding teachers to teach these programs. We need more teachers who speak other languages so that we can really increase our dual language programs.
Chancellor, I'd like to ask you about coding, the STEM. Because the Spanish government, at least part of the Spanish government, are trying to copy some things or
Right.
of the U.S., and one of these is coding. Here is a big issue. Obama last December in the debate talk about STEM, talk about coding. My question is, how important is for you the coding for the little kids, and how did you do that? Because we're trying to figure out how to do this in Spain, but it's so hard, it's so expensive. We have to train the teachers. So how important is, and how did you do that?
Okay, well, the first thing we did, which I think is the most important thing for a country to do, is we develop what we call a framework. We actually have a guide that says, in order to do STEM well, this is what you have to do in kindergarten, this is what you have to do first. So we have a guide. And we have a guide that every principal receives. So as they're thinking about how they spend their money or who they hire, that guide helps them. The other thing is we said, well, if this is the guide for what to do, what are the materials you need? For example, in lower grades, we think using Legos as a beginning tool in STEM is very important. We know that students who use Legos are more likely to think mathematically and to be able to configure new systems. So we've said these are some of the programs we want to see. We've also started training teachers. We are having a lot of training this summer in what we call STEM institutes, because STEM is not one way of doing things. It's lots of different ways. And we now say, okay, if teachers, we had a meeting a couple of months ago, 1,000 teachers showed up. So there's two ways of getting trained. You're a teacher, you're interested, you go. You're a principal and you want to do a strong emphasis in your school in STEM, you make the teachers go. So it has two different pathways. The other thing is we want to make sure when we started doing STEM, we ran into two problems. Number one, that many of our buildings are very old. So wiring is a big problem. So now we have all these young teachers, many of which already know how to use technology well, but our buildings don't have the capacity all the time for the blended learning that we're seeing. So we're doing a massive research around the city about which schools need to be upgraded, and it's a very expensive proposition, which means that we have to be somewhat strategic. What are you going to do this year versus this year and this year? So that's one of the challenges that we have, but also I think it's also something that's good because it lets us do this from scratch. We're also looking for technology that doesn't require wiring. Another issue we ran into, although it's gotten a lot better, is we found that when we talk about STEM, and just science and tech, that boys were more interested than girls. So we started looking at how do we get girls. This is one of the things the Danish minister had asked me. She said in Denmark, they're getting a lot of boys interested, but they couldn't do it to the girls. So we started doing some STEM programs, girls only. We have a Girls Who Code. We have a Black Girls Who Code. We have all these programs that are in the beginning gender specific until they feel comfortable with it, and then we go co-ed. It was a challenge that we found that we have to move. The other thing, and again it goes back to my idea of collaboration, we try to find schools, the one I went to today is one of them, that have already done very innovative things in STEM and made them model schools for other schools to visit. We have a middle school in Brooklyn that we just took, 70 superintendents from across this country to see what she does and how she does it. Because if everyone's going to reinvent the wheel, it doesn't make sense. So go somewhere where it's already looking good, where they've already worked out the problems, and then that principal, at least in New York City, her job is to help any principal who comes and says, I want to do this your way. And she has materials, she gives advice, she sends her teachers to help other principals if they want to do it. So creating a model, doing a lot more teacher training, trying to get rid of the notion that this is a boys' field, and also starting very, very young. I think we ran into a real problem years ago when we decided technology was important and we did it all in middle school. Too late. And the little kids today come all ready to do it. So we need to start younger, and also a lot of parent engagement and parent workshops so parents understand what we mean by STEM, a lot more science. One of the other schools and also I should say the major that's helped us in New York, much more cooperation with our big business companies. We are working with Microsoft, General Electric, all the big companies that have because remember, why do we do STEM? So these kids will have jobs. And the company's investment should be in how am I going to get the employees that I need in the future. So I know last year I went to speak at the General Electric convention in Florida about what it is that we're doing, but they also said, well, this is what we're going to need. And one of the big takeaways from that convention was that more and more technology does not require necessarily a college degree, and that we are missing out on people who are very capable of doing certain things. And we need to reach those people to work in our schools, but maybe have a different name for them. So one of the things we're looking at in New York, particularly for middle schools and high schools, is a computer tech license. Not fully a teacher license, but someone who will help teachers with technology, but also will help fix the machines when they break down. So there's a lot of things we're doing. So, but this is a very carefully thought out plan. We have a whole department, the DOE, who works on it. And like I said, if any of you who want, the framework is there. We wrote it. We have it. We'd be happy to give it away.
It's interesting, no? Because the leaders in technology, you go to Silicon Valley, there are people who never, they are dropouts in university.
Well, we try not to say that. You're thinking Silicon Valley. We try to say that we can train you for two things. And eventually you may want, college is not just about a degree or getting a job. It is part of it. It's also about learning about other people. It's about broadening your experiences. I was just at a school, high school, so someone says, well, why should we go to college if, exactly what you just said, because you go to college for many reasons. You go to college to learn to be independent. If it's the first time you leave home. You go to college. I just did a Latino expo last Saturday, and one of the mothers said, well, why should my child go to college? Because, my husband owns a business. I said, because when they leave your home and they go out on their own, they learn how to be real people. So we've got to sell college or universities for reasons other than just a diploma and a job. It is one of them, but it's not the only one.
President Obama said that, talking about the economy, the future economy, that is, U.S. Want to be, keep on being the leader, has to be the leader in innovation, and of course in STEM. The question is very simple: do we want to be producers of technology, or do we want to be consumers? That's the simple question, and that's what I think this whole program is.
Yes, STEM also is encouraging something called Maker Faire. I don't know if you're familiar with that expression. Maker Faire is how do you encourage students starting in younger grades to be inventors, to be creators of their own knowledge. And now we have this big Maker Faire in New York City that's an international Maker Faire. It's actually held in the Hall of Science out in Queens. And I went to speak at it last year, and they warned me ahead of time that the speakers and the people in the audience were mostly not going to be from New York City. And it turned out to be just the opposite. About 80% of the audience was from New York City, because if any city in the world wants to innovate, it should be New York. I mean, things here change. For those of you who've been in New York or travel, neighborhoods change. I drove through a neighborhood today. I can't believe what happened there. So I do think that innovation is in our DNA, but I think innovation has to start with young children. It has to move away from teaching in classrooms where 30 children are reading the same book at the same time, filling out the ditto sheets. We've had this discussion before. If schools continue to teach where everyone has to learn the same thing at the same time, you can't say when you're 4, now become innovative. Innovation has to start in the way you teach, in the way your classroom is set up, and in how you approach. I went to a first grade in not a very rich part of the city, and the principal insists that from first grade, children work in groups of 3, which is what most business is all about. And in those groups of 3, that at the end of the year, they create a toy that has never been invented before. And that they use the kind of books they read and whatever. And then, because she wanted me to be the judge. I don't do judging. I mean, that's the last thing I need. But the reality is that that's the kind of thing we're looking for in our schools. There's a program called Future Problem Solvers. Future Problem Solver gives you a problem. Right now, a lot of the problems have to do with sustainability and climate change. And then the students spend a whole year doing the research, and at the end of the semester, we have 2 finalists right now, I think in Milwaukee, from this city. And they create something new or a solution to the problem. But you can't have that in classrooms where the teacher does all the talking and the children do all the listening, and then you have this rote, everybody reading the same page at the same time. Or ditto sheets is an end result. It's got to be interactive classrooms where there's a lot of talk and a lot of thinking.
I don't know if it's appropriate, but would you mind to say this in Spanish? Just 30 seconds just to get clear.
Es muy importante si vamos a llegar a las escuelas del futuro y que los trabajos del futuro, nuestros hijos van a estar preparados, que las escuelas cambien la manera de enseñanza. Las clases donde todos los niños están leyendo el mismo libro al mismo tiempo, con páginas que tienen que cubrir, que no tengan imaginación, no van a llegar a ser los estudiantes que van a poder formar compañías nuevas o inventar cosas nuevas. Es muy importante que las escuelas permiten que los niños hablen más y que las maestras escuchen más. Y tenemos que tener esto en el sistema de escuela pública.
It sounds more like the
What? She can speak English, too.
it sounds what you said. It sounds more like the progressive model, no? That you can find in certain the private schools.
I would call it moderate. I was a principal. I was a teacher. I taught this way all my life, and I consider it common sense teaching. I don't like putting labels on things, and I consider it also teaching for the future. And I think, progressive in New York right now means, maybe that you're not so accountable for certain standards. I believe you can do all this with standards, but you just don't ram things down people's throats. And to me, if you don't have classrooms where kids are talking, there's no learning. When I visit a school, principals already know, the chancellor's coming, make sure everybody talks. I mean, I went to a school recently where I knew that's what they were told, because I don't think they knew what they were talking about. But if the chancellor comes, make sure you're talking. And we now introduced in all our schools Socratic seminar, where students have to, in circles, defend different issues in middle school. And I can tell when they're just doing it because I'm coming to visit, or when it's been part of what they've been doing. But I do believe that talk is crucial. And thinking. And students can solve the problems. I go to schools where I always encourage kids to send me recommendations on how I can do my job better. But they're going to be the future tomorrow. You're not going to learn to be an inventor at 21. You have to have been that way as you're going through.
What is the relationship with the private schools? Do you take things from them? You mentioned before that
I
the
steal
publics are
wherever there's a
the-
good idea. To me, we work very well with most of the charter schools. I visit charter schools to see what ideas. I think one of the ideas that I took from one of the charter schools last year, which we're implementing this year, is there was a charter school that, because not every elementary school teacher likes to teach math, that if you had a really good math teacher in your building, that teacher would teach math to all the fifth graders or all the fourth graders. So I took that from a school that I visited. We call it departmentalization, which normally we didn't do here in grades K to 5. We did it 6, 7, and 8. So that idea I took back, and this year we're actually doing it in about 100 schools to see how it works, and other schools that they want to do it can do it also. I think also, I work well with the parochial schools. We visit each other. But I do think with, 1,600 schools, I have a lot of great schools that I can learn from. I mean, and again, it's finding the models that work and then sending other people to visit them. Yes.
Hi, I'm Julia from China's Xinhua News Agency. I'm more interested in the GNT program. So how do the city run this program? And I learned that there's shortages of GNT seats in the city. So how does the city address this shortcoming?
Well, the GNT, the Gifted and Talented,
Yes.
teachers in New York State now, which was not true in the past, have to be certified. There's a special license they must get. They must be certified, and we just entered into an agreement with the New York Historical Society and Hunter College, who was given a major grant to certify teachers. So right now, we've asked we're starting 2 new GNT programs for next September, and the teachers who we think should teach in those programs hopefully will be taught there. And the difference is that we think that teachers who teach in Gifted and Talented should be very, very good at one curriculum area. And this area is going to be social studies. I mean, they'll be good at lots of things, but here again, if you're in a Gifted and Talented, these kids should be doing heavy-duty work. They should be not memorizing, they should be creating new knowledge, and they should become the models for other work in the schools. So getting that certification, years ago you didn't have to be certified. Anybody could apply for the job, and generally it was if you spoke another language or if you had a musical instrument. We're saying the most important quality of a teacher for Gifted and Talented is the ability to encourage kids to think creatively. And those programs are growing.
So
So Chancellor, I understand that you are on a strict schedule,
Oh
and I
my
know that
goodness.
some of you would like to do one-on-one interviews. How many of you want to do that? Very briefly. So are there any final, we could maybe just do one final question at the round table, but then we should go to the one-on-ones? Okay, and if there's not, then why don't we
asking.
go ahead and, oh, you have one more, sorry, thank you.
I just want to confirm from you, are you in regulatory capacity over private schools in New York City? And secondly, given the situation we have around the world now in terms of terror attacks, how safer are public schools in New York City?
Very safe. I would put my child in any one of them without a problem. And I think we've done a very good job at raising our safety. We have safety agents in every one of our schools. And I think as far as how we train teachers and principals to administer the safety in the buildings, I'm very confident that they were in a very, very good place. Someone always does something wrong that they shouldn't, but keep in mind I have 1,600 schools.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Como una ministra.